Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Radha Natarajan. I am the Executive Director of the New England Innocence Project. I know many of you have seen Trial 4 or have otherwise followed the events leading up to today, but I want to give some background for those who haven't been following this story. In 1993, Boston detective John Mulligan was murdered while he was in his car outside a Walgreens pharmacy in Boston. At the time he was murdered, Detective Mulligan, along with several other Boston police officers, were involved in significant corruption and crime. The corrupt officers, excuse me, there's some feedback. I'm just going to ask some folks to mute and then we'll continue. The corrupt officers who had the most to lose by a thorough investigation of Detective Mulligan's murder ended up leading that investigation themselves. When they learned that Sean Ellis happened to be at the Walgreens that night, those same officers built a case against him, even though the timing was wrong, the motive was wrong, and nothing fit. But they were motivated to make it fit. In 2015, the wrongful murder conviction of Sean Ellis was overturned, and in 2018, the DA's office declined to pursue another trial. But the gun convictions that stemmed from that corrupt and flawed investigation remains. In 2020, Sean Ellis, along with his attorneys, filed a motion for a new trial on the wrongful gun convictions. Today, District Attorney Rollins filed her assent, her agreement to the motion to overturn those convictions. In her filing, District Attorney Rollins said, and I quote, "In a case like this, which is tainted and infected by significant and egregious police corruption and prosecutorial misconduct, the Commonwealth must always balance the necessity for preserving society's interest in the administration of justice against the rights of the defendant. Here, both require the same result. Accordingly, the granting of the defendant's motion for a new trial is appropriate." Now, this is just the next step in this, and we're going to start today, and I'll just let folks know sort of how we're going to do this today. We're going to first hear from Sean Ellis's attorneys, Rosemary Scapicchio and Jillise McDonough. We're going to hear from Lisa Kavanaugh, the director of the CPCS Innocence Program, and we're going to hear from Sean Ellis, all on their reactions to District Attorney Rollins filing today. We're then going to take questions, and I will be asking those questions to the panelists. So I'm going to first start with Rosemary Scapicchio.
Thank you. Oh, that's me then. Hold on. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's doing that. We just did a sound check and it didn't do it. Rada, anything? Sorry about that. I have no idea why it's doing that. Anything that I can do?
Are all the screens, is this the only screen you have open for
Yes.
this event?
Do you want me to sign off and sign back in?
That sounds good.
Okay, I can do that. I apologize. You guys can start without me.
This is the new tech issues for press conference. Thanks for all your patience, everyone.
Sure. Is that better? Yay. Okay. I have no idea what that was. I apologize to everyone. So my name is Attorney Rosemary Scapicchio. I, along with Jillise McDonough, represented Sean Ellis for this past, well, me for a lot longer than Jillise, but we are thrilled at the courageous decision of DA Rollins to assent to Sean's motion for a new trial. We are, for the first time ever, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has taken some responsibility and acknowledged that the corruption that infected both the murder conviction and the robbery conviction also infected the drug conviction. I mean, the firearms conviction, but more importantly than that, it's an acknowledgement that the corruption existed and that it affected Sean's life for 22 years. And because of that acknowledgement, because we now know that the corruption infected everything, we can plan to move forward with that. And so what happens when they acknowledge wrongdoing is now we can look to figure out how and why it happened. Because when the Suffolk County DA's office, before Rachael Rollins, dismissed the murder conviction and the robbery conviction against Sean, they said, we still think he's guilty. This is not about innocence. This is because we can't find witnesses. And they didn't say one thing, not one thing, about the corruption that infected the entire trial. And now Rachael Rollins has taken the brave position of understanding and acknowledging the corruption and acknowledging the effect it had on Sean's trial and his right to a fair trial. And in doing so, she's acknowledged that there was a problem and that it needs to be fixed. And this is what reform looks like. This is what a progressive DA looks like. It's hard. It's hard to make these acknowledgments, both of the Boston Police Department and of her own office. But she was willing to do that because it's the right thing to do. And this is how you effectuate change. You call out what you see, you put a label on it, you acknowledge that it's happened, and that way you can effectuate change. And that's what we're hoping here. We're hoping now that from this acknowledgement, that the motions will go to the court, and the court ultimately has the final decision as to what, if anything, it will do on our request for a motion for new trial. So this is just the first step. But we're hoping that with this first step and the acknowledgement of the corruption, that the district attorney's office will be open now to investigating all convictions involving Mulligan, Asara, Robinson, Brazel, and Keeler. And we're hoping that that's the next step that the office takes on this mission for change. And we're really excited that this is happening for us. We've been waiting. Sean's been waiting 27 years to clear his name. And this is a giant step forward in that process of clearing his name. And we couldn't be happier or prouder of District Attorney Rollins today.
Thank you, Rosemary. Jillise, do you want to give your reactions to DA Rollins filing today?
Sure, thank you. So as Attorney Scapicchio mentioned, my name is Jillise McDonough. I've been working alongside her for a few years on this case. And I just want to reiterate that we're thrilled that DA Rollins finally did acknowledge that the corruption that infected the entire case also affected the gun conviction. We were very disappointed in 2018 when the DA's office and Boston Police stood up and said, we're dismissing the case not because Sean's innocent, but because we can't prove the case against him. And it was really kind of something that we've been working hard to change their minds on that. And we're just thrilled that DA Rollins finally did make that acknowledgement. And obviously it's still up to the court and it's still up to Judge Ullman, but we're really encouraged by DA Rollins's assent, and we really look forward to hopefully finally clearing Sean's name of all the charges.
Thank you, Jillise. And I know Rosemary and you have both mentioned, what the DA's office previously said about Sean's innocence. I want to turn now to the director of the CPCS Innocence Program, Lisa Kavanaugh, to give her reaction to today's filing.
Thank you so much. I share the joy and relief and gratitude for DA Rollins' leadership today, which is a powerful indication that we are really at a crossroads And we're at a crossroads that requires the kind of bravery and leadership we're seeing in DA Rollins' willingness to acknowledge the depth of corruption and the depth of its impact on all of the charges that Sean was accused of, and all of his convictions. I think we're also at a crossroads because we have a decision to make about whether we're going to address wrongful convictions in partnership with prosecutors' offices that are willing to re-examine past wrongs, or whether we're going to continue to do it in a purely adversarial, one case at a time manner. One of the things that my program has really emphasized, and Sean's case came in because Rose referred it to the Innocence Program, largely because there was a need for support, for financial support to pay for experts and investigators, for the public records fees. But what has emerged over the last several years is the reality that we need to do more than just the sort of status quo discovery and litigation in individual cases, that we need to be partnering, we need to be working with prosecutors like DA Rollins to correct wrongful convictions in a more systemic way. So the crossroads is, are we going to continue as we've been doing, one by one? And anyone who saw trial 4 saw just what that looks like, how time consuming it is, how inefficient, how deeply unfair to the people who are harmed by a wrongful conviction to have to wait so long for this moment. Or are we instead going to take this as an opportunity to look at all of the cases that may have been impacted by the corruption at the heart of Sean's conviction? And I think what's exciting to me about DA Rollins' position today and her leadership in this case is that it shows a willingness to take on a culture, not just what happened in one case, but an entire culture that produces many wrongful convictions. So my hope is that this is the first step, not only, or the next step in Sean's case, and certainly I am hopeful and will be watching closely to see the litigation proceed in court. But I'm also excited to see where it leads us as a system, and whether we can take on all of the cases that were touched by the police who are shown to have been corrupt, all of the police who touched Sean's case, not only the ones who were convicted of crimes, but the others associated with the investigation and with his wrongful conviction.
Thank you, Lisa. Sean, I think people really want to hear from you. And I just want to say that, you've always said that your fight is not just about you. But today, there's something new in your case. So we want to hear both about that and how you're feeling, and also what it does mean for the bigger issues that you have been fighting for since you were released, and the work that you've done with the New England Innocence Project and the exoneree community.
I sit here very, very emotional, very thankful. I'm thankful to DA Rollins for her acknowledgement with regards to what happened to me in this case, and the conduct of members of the Boston Police Department, and people within her own office, as it was stated by Rosemary. It's truly a bittersweet thing, because as I was hearing people talk, the thought that came to my mind is that I wish my dad was here, because he went to his grave with me being locked away in prison, for the remainder of my life. And so and I wasn't able to attend his funeral. And so with DA Rollins' assent to my motion, what that brought up in part was, I finally get some kind of closure for my dad, because now I can go forward in my life without having any sort of conviction on my record, for anything that I didn't do. And so, I'm totally emotional, but the last 28 years of my life has been the Commonwealth versus Sean Ellis and me fighting to prove my name. And what happens in 28 years is us in the period of 28 years, there's a woman that gives birth to a child, and that child goes to daycare and then the kindergarten, and then that child goes to first grade eventually, and then to high school, and then graduates from high school and makes a determination of if they want to go into the workforce or further their education. And they go on to college and they start a career. And I didn't have that opportunity for 28 years. And so, to be at a point now to have my name cleared is like it's just truly emotional. And now I can get on with my life in the manner that it was in prior to my life being snatched from me. And so, I'm definitely thankful to DA Rollins. I'm super thankful to my two defense attorneys, Rosemary and Scapicchio and Jillise McDonough. They're super amazing. I'm thankful to my former attorneys for doing what they did to fight. But the problem at the heart of these last 28 years stemmed from the corruption that existed within the Boston Police Department, and like with what happened within that corruption, as the corrupt actors acted, the blue wall began to insulate, if you will, is a word that I'm looking for. Begin to insulate. And I'm not saying through fault of their own, but is you look at your brother and whether his actions are right or wrong, you want to insulate. And so that's what they did, but it's not the right thing to do. And so the decision today acknowledges that is what happened. And so I'll talk more in the near future. But I just want to say that I am so thankful. It feels great to finally be free. I was asked at one point, whether I'm free, and I spoke to that. But it feels great today to finally be free, and not have to worry about any convictions on my record. And so, Lisa, Rada, I thank you both for your support. For everybody out there who has supported me. I get your messages, I get your emails, I get your inboxes, and I thank you. And continue to stay connected. And you can visit my website at trial4.com. But I look forward to moving forward. And you also asked as far as what does this mean for the overall message? Because as I've spoken about, it isn't just about Sean Ellis. There was a culture within the Boston Police Department through that encapsulated what happened in my case. And so there's a list of police detectives that I know personally that have done wrongdoings in other cases. So that's something that I'm gonna communicate with my attorneys about and you all about as we continue to move forward in our next steps. So I just thank you all.
Thank you, Sean. And as was acknowledged before, and I want to just say, on behalf of the New England Innocence Project, how grateful we are to have you as a trustee. We can't imagine having a better person to really talk about this work, and frankly, the how every single wrongful conviction, not just yours, exposes the incredible flaws in the criminal legal system. And I do think that DA Rollins filing today acknowledges that. I want to start asking some of the questions from the audience, and one which relates to, a couple questions that are sort of procedural and I think pretty much go to Rosemary, but others can answer too. One is, when do you anticipate, Rosemary, a decision from the court on the motion for new trial? Do you have are there any guesses or any thoughts that you want to say about that to help people know sort of what is the next step?
Sure. So what we anticipate now, this motion was, I believe, hand-delivered to Judge Elman this morning. He will have an opportunity to read our motion for new trial and read DA Rollins' assent to our motion for new trial. And then I imagine he's going to schedule some sort of status conference with all of us to determine where we go from here. Because the court is the ultimate decision maker in terms of a motion for new trial, because the conviction lives in the court has the ultimate say as to whether or not to accept the assented to motion for new trial and actually grant that motion for new trial. But Judge Elman, I think, is a really hard worker, and I think he will get on this right away. And I think his clerk will reach out to us fairly soon and at least establish a status conference to figure out what the court wants to hear from us in terms of next steps. So the possibilities are that he could accept the pleadings from the district attorney's office, and in that there is no opposition, he could allow the motion for new trial, or he could determine that he needs more information, and then he would tell us, hopefully at that status conference, what any additional information is that he may need in order to make his determination that justice wasn't done in this case.
Rose, a follow-up question. I'm not sure if you're ready to answer this, but if the gun charges are actually ultimately dropped, and as you mentioned, it is Judge Ullman's decision, will Sean exercise the right to sue the city of Boston? That is the question.
I believe he will, and I believe he should. I believe that although we are on a path now to change with respect to the criminal justice system, with respect to Sean, we need to hold the police department responsible for what happened here financially, because Sean lost the opportunity to live his life for 22 years. He was locked in a cage for 22 years. And now, although he's working hard and he's got a full-time job, he's, one step up from an entry-level position, and he's in his 40s. And so how does he get compensated for all of those years of not just lost time with his family and lost situations that he can't participate in, but lost income and experiences and ability to move up the chain or the ladder in terms of career paths? They took that all from him when they decided to wrongfully implicate him in the murder of Detective Mulligan. And so, I think it's imperative that we stand up and say, no, this isn't going to happen to another Black and brown kid in Boston. It's not going to happen. It's not okay for this police department to literally just go, oh, sorry, and walk away. And they didn't even say sorry. The only one who said sorry so far is Rachael Rollins. The police department hasn't ever come forward and even acknowledged that they were wrong. If you watch trial 4, you'll see Detective McNeely still says that, there was nothing wrong. This was a perfect investigation. And the problem with that attitude with the Boston Police Department is if they don't acknowledge that there's a problem, it's impossible to change because there will be no investigation. There will be no moving forward if it's the same old, same old. And so I think it's important for Sean to file a civil suit and hold them financially responsible and civilly responsible for his 22 years in jail, where he should have been home with his family and with his dad and having all the experiences that we were allowed to have because we weren't framed by the Boston Police Department.
Thank you, Rosemary. There are some questions that I think anybody here who wants to can answer, and they relate to sort of, two different aspects of this decision today. One is, what does it say about the Suffolk Integrity Review Bureau and sort of what does it say about the future of Suffolk? And the second question is what does it say about correcting wrongful convictions throughout the state? Does it have implications for either of those things? Or, should it, sort of, can you talk a little bit about what it means for other people, other cases, both within Suffolk and outside?
I can certainly speak to that to some extent. I mean, I certainly hope that it is a sign of a broader recognition, both that the corruption in the Boston Police Department may have impacted many other cases. And so I think there's certainly, for the first time, it feels like there's a real possibility that in that county we can do a meaningful systemic review of cases that are potentially infected by police corruption. I do think that this is also part of a broader conversation, and that there are other leaders in Massachusetts who are trying to take on some of the systemic problems with wrongful convictions. I think it's important to recognize, for example, District Attorney Marian Ryan in Middlesex County has been a leader in some regards on that, and has certainly been another person who is seeking to address some of the systemic causes of wrongful convictions. I think we have to be having these conversations openly. We have to have mechanisms to hold the police accountable. And I think I would echo what Rose said, which is that I think it's critically important that there be civil and financial accountability for wrongdoing, because quite frankly, just the overturning of a conviction clearly doesn't change anything. And we can look at the responses to Sean's overturned conviction. We can also look, frankly, to the responses to any of the other recent exonerations out of Suffolk County, which have met with equal resistance on the part of the Boston Police Department to acknowledge wrongdoing. So I think this is an opportunity, and I do think that for the first time, we really are talking about the importance of these kinds of partnerships and of approaching and talking about the causes of wrongful convictions in a more collaborative way, one that includes prosecutors and defense attorneys, and where we're educating ourselves together. So I think there's certainly reason to be optimistic, but there's a lot of work and bravery that's going to have to go into that coming to be in reality.
Yeah. If you've heard me speak, I've often spoke about Ricky McGee and Stephen Pina, and I know several others, but those are two cases that I have some degree of familiarity with. And I do know that in those two cases, one of which involves DNA evidence, Stephen Pina's case involves DNA evidence that really shows that he's been in prison wrongfully. There's no DNA evidence that is connecting him to that crime. And so I often speak about his name. There's Ricky McGee, who in his case, he had a member of the Boston Police Department, Daniel Keeler, take a witness of his into a closed setting and have a conversation with that witness, and then that witness ended up not testifying on behalf of Ricky McGee. So the pressure that the Boston Police has a history of laying down on witnesses in order to get them from cooperating is well known. And so when we look at the decision that was made in my case, and like, I'm very hopeful that the things that people are aware of with regards to the conduct of members of the homicide unit within the Boston Police Department. Like, I'm hopeful that we as a community can begin to organize and really start to make meaningful calls to those who are in elected positions to correct some of these wrongs done. And so, I'm excited about that aspect of the work.
Thank you, Sean. I don't know, Rosemary or Jillise, if you want to weigh in on that question of sort of what does this decision mean? If what are your hopes, or what do you predict that it means for other cases?
Jillise, you want to take it?
Sure. I think District Attorney Rollins is the first real progressive DA we've seen in Massachusetts. So hopefully voters across the state will see the impact that it can have on the community to have a progressive DA, and hopefully other attorneys step up and try and run for DA in the other counties so that we can start to have these sorts of reviews in other counties as well, because she has stepped up and agreed to quite a few motions for new trial in the short time that she's been in office. And it would be great to see that happen in some other counties as well, where some of the police departments are just as corrupt as the Boston police was around the time of Sean's conviction. So hopefully it starts to kind of create a wave across the state.
Rosemary, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. I think it's a path forward. That's what we hope it is a path forward. And I see the path forward being, a comprehensive investigation into not just, limited to the offices that are involved in Sean's case, but there was a culture of corruption at the Boston Police Department in the late 80s and early 90s that extended well into the late 90s. And so that's what we need to address. That's what we need to understand, why it happened, how it happened, and who was affected by it. And so I would like to see not just the path forward be just on the offices involved in Sean's case that we know were corrupt. I would like to see the path forward be enlarged to that culture, because this couldn't have happened without the command staff understanding what was going on. It couldn't have happened without the sergeant detectives understanding what was going on. And so if we have this culture of corruption that's infecting the way that police officers are doing their job, it doesn't begin and end at Sean's case. There are many, many more Sean Ellises out there. And I'm hopeful that the path gets wide and that it's a broad stroke and we do a thorough investigation, because I'm confident if we do, that other people will have their convictions overturned and will get out from underneath wrongful convictions and illegal sentences.
I want to see if there are other questions from the press. I know, Sean, there was a question about how people can support the work. Do you want to talk about that now?
Yes. So if you want to support me, you can definitely stay plugged into my social media platforms. I'm also just doing some work around trial 4 and everything that happened. Just visit my website, but also support organizations such as the England Innocence Project, such as CPCS, and get involved with the social work, the social movement that is being created around wrongful convictions. When we talk about my spending 22 years in prison, and when we talk about my fighting this case for 28 years, is a lot of times we look at the numbers, but we don't look at the person. And when we deal with wrongful convictions, there are people involved in that. There are families of the defendant. There are friends and loved ones of the defendant, and there are families of the victim. And everybody collectively gets brought through and hurt and traumatized. So we can definitely get involved with the movement to correct wrongful convictions, bring awareness to wrongful convictions, because it's the epidemic in this country that nobody's talking about. Wrongful convictions are a problem here in Massachusetts, without question, but it's going on nationally. And I know that I'm plugged in nationally to the wrongful conviction community. And so, when I say to plug in, let's plug in and support the work.
It's been mentioned a few times by the folks on this panel about the leadership or the bravery, the courage of DA Rollins in making this decision today. And in thinking about, and that she, maybe stands alone in that among district attorneys, in Massachusetts and maybe throughout the country. And so, can you talk about sort of why it requires this bravery, or maybe we should talk about, as Sean said, like how can the public support that movement so that it's not district attorneys standing by themselves to do justice, but actually that the community is doing things to both hold them accountable, but also to support decisions like this that really shouldn't be brave, actually. I think when people watch Trial 4, I think most people who watched Trial 4 felt that this was an obvious thing to be done. Like, why do we characterize it as brave or courageous? Can you guys talk about that?
Sure. Lisa, do you want to take it first, or do you want me to take it?
I just had a couple of reactions to that one, so I'm happy to start. You know, I think it's true that it's sort of puzzling that we characterize it that way, although I think it is. And part of the reason why right now it's necessary to use that term, brave, is because we don't have, and we have a long way to go before we have anything that looks like a truly engaged, invested community that understands the role of prosecutors, that holds prosecutors accountable, that, and there are organizations already, community organizations, Families for Justice's Healing, Court Watch. There are organizations that are trying to empower non-lawyers, members of the public, community members, people whose families are affected by the legal system in all kinds of different ways. CPCS also trying to engage people to say, this is all of our responsibility. It's our responsibility to serve on juries. It's our responsibility to show up and vote and to, encourage and support progressive candidates who put themselves out there and are trying to break with the status quo. So, I think that the way to make it less about bravery and more about engagement and partnership is for all of us, not just those of us who are directly involved in the legal system, but the entire community, to find ways of having our voices engaged in these conversations. I know that watching the election and watching the election process when DA Rollins ran was so exciting, because as I watched it, what I saw, and I didn't, I think most public defenders probably are sitting on the sidelines and, essentially saying, well, let's see how any one of those candidates plays out. It's one thing to make promises in a campaign. It's another thing to actually to come through on them in practice. But what was exciting is that for the first time, candidates were actually talking about things that mattered and were enlisting the input of the community. And I just think there has to be so much more of that. And when a DA does do something like this, we need to show our support, not just, as lawyers, but as entire communities, to say, this is what we want. If you're going to prosecute people in our names, and I'm channeling that phrase that Darrell Jones coined, not in my name, really each person in our community needs to live by that phrase and say, don't do that in my name. You are my elected prosecutor. I don't want you to do that in my name. So I think that's the way it becomes less about bravery and more about being truly representative of who our community is and what we stand for. And that's where we ought to be going, is in the direction where it's no longer brave. It's just what's expected. It's just the job.
Can I jump in for a second?
Please.
Thank you. I frankly think it is brave. I think she is a person of color. She's a female DA. She's only been in office 2 years. This was a cop killing. And she took on the Boston Police Department. She took on, other DAs in her office. And she looked at this case from beginning to end, and she made the decision that the whole thing is infected with this corruption. And it would have been so much easier for her to not make this decision and to put it in the court's lap to make that determination. But she took that step and said, no, and not in my name. I'm not going to prosecute this case any longer, not in my name. And that's pretty brave. We can't ask for any more than that from an elected official as a district attorney. She did a job that, she said she was going to review it. She did review it. She found that the corruption infected everything, and she filed a motion to assent. That's brave in my book.
Yes. And yeah, definitely brave. I know that for me, since filing the motion is it's like having to relive. Kind of have to relive the whole process. And I know that I got to a point as I was waiting, damn, I'm gonna have to wait and find out what's going on in my life, with the rest of everybody else. But despite that, I understood that there was a process that the DA's office had to go through. I know that DA Rollins had to look and examine and make sure that everything was examined appropriately. But what I want to speak about is the fact that is super brave, because she's been under attack since she's been in office, right? Not just because she's a Black woman, but she's been under attack because she's Black, because she's a woman, and she's progressive. And that right there isn't the norm in an institution that has a history of being run by white men. And so when you stand up against that institution and you look back at the track record, or back at the practices of this institution, and you identify, or you see where, damn, this institution, the way that this thing has been operating, is in fault, is wrong, and then you take a position to where you say, I'm not standing with that, is tremendously brave. And me personally, I have a lot of information with my case, and I could have came public with the information and the details about the case, but I think that the person coming in and having to deal with it, that wasn't part of the system, that was like an outsider, or that was progressive in their thinking and in their approach, it's like whoever that person was. And in this instance is DA Rollins. She had an opportunity to look at things for herself the way that they are and make a decision, and to have him and having made the decision that she made, again, is super brave. And I think that we as a community, because we often look at elections and we cheer people on in the elections, and then once they get into office, we tend to let them go about their work as if they don't need our support still. But when you're progressive and you're doing your work, you're coming up against a status quo that has been operating in a way that compels you to be that compels the person to be progressive. So we have to continue to support them even while they're in office and going about the work that we as voters have commissioned them to do. And so I encourage the community to stand with DA Rollins in her fortitude to make the decision that was made.
Thank you so much, Sean.
And for 27 years, her office, when I talk about other DAs, her office fought this conviction.
Come on now.
Every step of the way. They fought our requests for documents. They fought our motions for new trial. They fought our request for discovery. They fought our request for anti-corruption files. They fought tooth and nail to keep Sean in jail. And she said, not in my name. You're not doing this any longer. I'm not going to let this go forward in my name. We have started down this path, and we're going to clear the path and start anew. We're going to acknowledge our faults. We're going to acknowledge the problems, and we're going to try to clear that path wide enough so that everybody can walk down.
Yeah, and one of the ironic things you already asked about is whether or not there's going to be a civil suit. And what we know is that you have more rights to discovery in civil suits than when you are fighting for your life in a criminal case. And so I think that, this, depending on what Judge Ullman does, it paves the way for all of us, including you, Sean, to get answers on what happened. Because in the course of this civil suit, yes, it's about accountability, it's about compensation, it's also about getting some answers that were hidden, that remain hidden. And so I think it's really a significant thing. We don't have any more questions. I just want to ask the panelists, and I'll go in the same order of Rosemary and Jillise and Lisa, and then Sean, to just say, your last thoughts, closing remarks on how you feel about today, how you feel about the future, anything else you want to say, starting with Rose.
Thank you so much. So I'm grateful that we've taken this giant step forward. I'm hopeful that Judge Ullman will have the opportunity to read everything and come to the same conclusions that the corruption that infected the homicide conviction, the murder conviction, and the robbery conviction also infected the gun conviction, and once and for all, grant Sean a new trial on those gun convictions, because then there's a path forward. I know that people were asking about a civil suit, but I just want everyone to know we're putting the cart before the horse here. We haven't gotten the court to allow the motion for new trial yet, and we can't even think about what's going to happen on a civil suit and holding them accountable until we get Judge Ullman's decision in terms of what he's going to do with the motion for new trial. So I would say stay tuned. Thank you, everyone, for your support, and we hope that we're going to be moving forward on this case very shortly.
Jillise.
Thank you. So we're just really looking forward to getting Sean back into court and hopefully finally getting the vindication that he deserves, that he's been waiting for so long. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. Thank you for your support, and we really hope to have a good decision for Sean soon.
Yeah, I want to echo what Rose and Jillise said, and just add that I too I'm hopeful, but I'm also I'm going to remain skeptical. I think that it takes a lot of work and bravery on the part of a lot of people, and Suffolk County is not the only county where we need to be looking for real reform and real change. So I'm optimistic, but I also have my boxing gloves on because I think we have a fight ahead. And I also just want to give a shout out to Sean, who gives me hope every day through his, both through his endurance of this experience, but also just his leadership and partnership and friendship with the other members of the Exoneree Network, and the ways that he has chosen to pivot from his experience to looking for ways to support others. So I think I honor him in that regard, especially.
Absolutely. I agree. And Sean, turning to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll say this. Wounded but not broken. I'm definitely wounded. Support me, contact me, get a wounded but not broken. That's definitely a big way to support me. But I also want to say, wow, again, the power of women. The power of women. And if you've watched Trial 4, nothing else needs to be said. But the power of women. And if you haven't seen it, go watch it. Look for the part where I speak about the power of women, because it's yet another instance where the bravery and the tenacity and the doggedness and the fearlessness and just the boldness of women has shined through in my life. And so, I want to say that in a very big way. But then I also want to say this to people, to tuned to the website, the trialfor.com website, the Law Office of Rosemary Scapicchio website, the New England Innocence Project website, and CPCS website, if they have one, for the upcoming court dates, so that you all know what is happening in my case, and it's just one way for us to really kick off the court watch movement, because that in of itself needs to be a movement that is strengthened, if you will. So once again, I thank you all for your support.
All right. So I think we're going to close out here. Really grateful to everybody who joined us today. There will be a recording that will be made available to media. Please, let me just see if there's, please make, if you have any media inquiries, certainly you can email Rosemary, but also Jordan at newenglandinnocence.org. She can give you a copy of DA Rollins' pleading. I know there was a question about that. And we'll make the recording available to all of you. Thank you so much, Sean. We're so happy to take this next step with you, and we're going to be with you all the way.
Thank you. Love you, Rosemary.